Hello, everybody. Good evening, and thank you for joining us today for the eBetak, organized by Center for Civil Society with Rahul Basu. Rahul is the research director for Goa Foundation, which is an environmental nonprofit in Goa. He's also the member of the Future We Need, a global movement, as well as Goenchi Mati movement in Goa. Before he shifted to Goa, he was in the field of corporate finance for 18 years, and he has studied economics and management. And among his many associations, he's the advisor to Mines, Minerals and People, World Basic Income, and India Network Basic Income. Rahul, thank you so much for taking out the time to come on board today. We are really looking forward to this engagement, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Rajeshi, and the entire team at CCS. And thank you all for joining this talk on Sunday evening. It's very valuable, and I really appreciate that. What I'm going to do, we're going to run a second poll just now while I just introduce the topic. Anas, if you could just put the second poll up. So I've been with Goa Foundation now 2011, and Goa Foundation has existed from 1986. It's an environmental NGO and is pretty well known in the world of on the environmental side of things. Now, I joined Goa Foundation really coming at it from a corruption and governance standpoint, because I saw a number of problems which reminded me of the resource thirst here in Goa. And this work really for us started in 2012 when the Shah Commission report came out, and basically the Shah Commission said that in mining, iron ore mining in Goa, all mines were breaking the law and all laws were being broken by one or more mines. So we took this report to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court put a stay on mining, and then the hearings began. In 2013, I won't go into the details of the hearing, but in 2013, the Supreme Court turned around and asked us that we've said that intergenerational equity is part of the right to life, and we want to implement intergenerational equity, and please tell us how. And this journey really began from there. Let me just, I think I'm going to share my screen now. Just give me a minute. This is the broad structure of how to do the talk today. We're going to do it in two parts. The first part is a little case study and introducing what we're calling the shared inheritance paradigm. And then the second part, we'll do a short Q&A then. And in the second part, I'll talk about how this deals with some of the other issues, resource curse, what is the paradigm shift, how do we think about the environment, how does this deal with SDGs and sustainability more generally. So I was on Goa and intergenerational equity. The Supreme Court asked us, how do we implement intergenerational equity? And this really had us puzzled. So we looked around the world to look at what do other countries do? What is the theory behind this? And it turned out that the idea of intergenerational equity is really simple. In order to implement intergenerational equity, you have to ensure that your children and future generations inherit at least as much as you inherited. So let me take a simple example to explain this. Suppose you've inherited some gold jewelry from your parents. Now, you have two choices with this gold jewelry. One is you can keep it safe in the house, or you can keep it safe in a bank locker, but that becomes either a headache or a cost. So you decide, let me sell this gold and buy some land. As long as I keep the land properly, I can consume the income from the land. My child gets the land and they can consume the income, and it can go down through generations. Now, in Goa and in India more generally, the state of Goa is the owner of the minerals. So the state of Goa is responsible for making sure that future generations inherit what we did. So let's do a little case study now on what happened in Goa over an 8-year period. Over this 8-year period from 2004 to 2012, we got the annual report of the single largest miner, SESA Goa, and we took the industry body statistics for the volume that SESA Goa exported and the whole industry exported. And we also used some of the government financial data. We'll use that a little bit later. So this is the SESA Goa data scaled up to get you all Goa data. So over the 8 years of 2004 to 2012, Goa exported approximately 88,000 crores of iron ore. Now the expense involved was 36,000 crore, and 5,000 crore was what we are calling a reasonable profit. From the SESA Goa annual report, we worked out what capital was deployed in the business, and we gave a 20% after-tax return on assets. So this is after tax and return on assets, not return on equity. This is extremely high, but we did it deliberately so that we don't have an argument that we've set this return very low. So the total cost works out to 36,000 crores. Sorry, it was 31,000 crores of expense and 5,000 crores, 5,500 crores of profit. 36,000 crores was the total cost. So the mineral, which from the point of view of the state of Goa was worth 51,000 crores, 52,000 crores. So there are two questions here. How much should the state of Goa have received for this mineral? The obvious answer is they should have got the whole thing. If it belonged to the state of Goa, they should have got all of it. Now, this is historical. This is a case study that actually happened, and this is annual reports of the mining company. So this has got no black money involved in this. This is a direct estimation from what they've told us. What is your guess of what they got? It works out that the state of Goa got less than 5% of the value of this ore. We got less than 2,400 crores. So basically, the Goa lost 49,000 crores over an 8-year period. And this is an enormous amount. This works out to about 3.5 lakhs per person in the state of Goa, about 14 lakhs for a family of 4. But this got lost. Where did it go? Now, what was happening effectively was we were selling minerals worth 100 for 5 to the extracting company. To SESA Goa was getting the minerals for 5. So they were showing the 95 as profit before tax, on which they paid tax to the center as well as some export duty. Their unearned profit, the extra profit after tax, was 31,000 crores. So you can see why this 49,000 crores has gone. But I want to point out a couple of things to this. The entire revenues of the state of Goa over those 8 years was 27,000 crores. We lost 49,000 crores in that period, almost double that. And 27,000 crores of state government revenues versus what the mining companies have captured unfairly, 31,000 crores, that's larger than the entire state government revenues. And it tells you something about what's going on politically. And the last thing to remember is everybody in the state of Goa lost 3.5 lakhs, and 40 mining companies or mining families made 31,000 crores. So this is essentially looting economics. This is not trickle down. It's a massive increase in inequality in the state of Goa, which has been hidden and not known. So what do we do? How do we actually resolve this? So we looked at this whole intergenerational equity idea, and we've come up with 5 simple principles for implementing intergenerational equity. And let me take you through them. The first principle is the minerals, natural resources, including minerals, belong to the state as a trustee on behalf of the people and especially future generations. Second, since we have inherited the minerals, we must ensure that future generations inherit either the minerals or their full value. Third, if we sell our minerals, if we mine and sell our minerals, we must ensure zero loss. We must ensure the full value of the minerals, other than this extraction cost and a reasonable profit, is received by the state of Goa. Fourth, we have to save the entire minerals, the entire money that we receive from the minerals for our future generations. And we are recommending a Norway-style fund. I'll explain a little bit later how we expect this to be managed. And fifth, we own the mineral, we own the fund, we own the income from the fund. Distribute that equally to everybody in the state of Goa as a citizen's dividend. This is also effectively a universal basic income. And let me just give you a quick sense of the scale. If we had taken that 51,000 crores worth of minerals, so it's a loss plus what the state government received, the entire amount, and put it into a future generations fund, and earned only a 3% real return after inflation, distributed that equally to everybody in the state of Goa, today, each person in the state of Goa would receive a dividend of 1,000 rupees a month. A family of four would receive 4,000 rupees a month. We would have eliminated extreme poverty in the state of Goa if we had done this in that time. Let me carry on. So let me just repeat this, because this is really the crux of it. Natural resources, including minerals, are owned by the state merely as a trustee for the people and future generations. We've inherited the minerals, so we have to ensure future generations inherit either the minerals or the value. If we sell our minerals, then we must ensure zero loss. We must get the full value of the minerals. Whatever we receive, we must save for our future generations in a Norway-style big mutual fund. And the real income of this fund, because it's been created from the minerals, belongs to everybody equally, distributed as a citizen's dividend. How do we expect this to be managed? How do we ensure that the funds are managed properly and the dividend actually is distributed? So the National Pension Scheme has a really well-designed structure. In the National Pension Scheme, we have individual contributions. In this case, we're looking at states making contributions. The money is invested in an index tracking fund, which is competed out across a variety of investment managers. NAVs come out daily, so it's very difficult to do any hera-fairy. And then the income is distributed in the current NPS as individually to people. In this case, it will be distributed individually as a citizen's dividend, and it follows a exempt taxable. So the dividend in this case would also be taxable. And there are certain political safeguards which have been very wisely incorporated into the National Pension Scheme. First, it's treated as a trust account and not part of the consolidated fund of the state or the center in this case. There are separate regulatory structures. PFRDA is the main regulator. SEBI manages the capital markets. And very importantly, all the central and state government employees have the retirement funds in it. So again, if some politician is trying to do something, we would have a whole variety of people who would know about it quickly and would protest. So if you think about the structure that we've talked about, there are a number of advantages. The first thing is, it is entirely constitutional. It ends up with justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity. Those are the four core principles of our preamble. But the five principles are driven entirely out of right to life. First principle and the second principle come out of public trust doctrine and intergenerational equity, both part of right to life. Zero loss and the citizen's dividend are equality, and common good is right to life also is the fund, and common good is the overall principle. It also embodies a whole variety of very important values that we all hold dear. It is ethical, it is moral, it is fair, just, and right. If you think about it, it also embodies the golden law of religion. Treat others as you would want them to treat you. If we had actually set up this fund in 2004 and we were getting 1,000 rupees in dividend, everybody in India and all over the world will be thinking, those were really good ancestors of the Goans, not very long back, but they are treating everybody equally. And from a moral philosophy standpoint, also, this embodies the Rawls' idea of justice as fairness. It also embodies Amartya Sen's capability approach, because the capital in the Future Generations Fund really represents capability, and the income increases the capability of the people. So let's look at the economics of this. We believe this is a massive improvement to the current way minerals are managed. The first thing is the overall capital of the state is maintained. The state has not lost 49,000 crores, so it is in effect sustainable. It is not losing its capital and impoverishing itself. Second, because the entire capital is now invested in the capital market, because through the NPS it would get invested into the capital market and not consumed, it actually enables growth of the overall economy, and of course the capital markets as well. Third is the fund earns the market rate of return. And we know that investment theory tells us that an active fund manager, let alone a politician, would find it very difficult to beat the market rate of return. So this is a third improvement. The fourth is this gives everybody effectively a universal basic income. And as we all understand, the universal basic income has a whole variety of other benefits to individuals, especially anybody who's disadvantaged. Fifth improvement is it will improve governance, because now there is no easy money coming into the budget. The politicians will have to improve the delivery of their services before they can go out and raise more taxes. In states like Goa, or in some of the more mining-rich states, it's easy to just extract more minerals and provide poor services and steal the money. But this forces better governance. Sixth is inequality itself will be stemmed. Inequality will not increase, and even the IMF is now saying that if you have lower inequality, the economy grows quickly. And finally, this is a fair structure. It's in fact a second best structure. The miner would not like it, nor would the mining dependent like it. They would want more money for them. The politicians would not like it. They would want money into the budget. And even NGOs like Goa Foundation, we all have our favorite causes, and we would want money to be given to us. But if any of this takes place, in effect, what is happening is we are consuming the wealth, the inheritance of our children. We are cheating our children so that we can spend and make merry today. So these are 7 economic benefits, or sort of political economic benefits, that we see coming out of this new shared inheritance paradigm. Now you must be wondering, is this utopia? So here's the progress we've already made. The National Mineral Policy 2019, which came out just before the last elections, says natural resources, including minerals, are a shared inheritance where the state is the trustee on behalf of the people to ensure that future generations receive the benefit of inheritance. So this embodies the first 2 principles of ours. The National Mineral Policy goes on to say state governments will endeavor to ensure that the full value of the extracted minerals is received by the state. If the minerals are worth 51,500 crores, state governments will endeavor to ensure that they get 51,000 crores. Now, I started out by talking about a Supreme Court case. And in 2014, based on our advocacy, the Supreme Court ordered the creation of a Goa Iron Ore Permanent Fund, as well as a cap on extraction in Goa, Both of these on grounds of intergenerational equity. The permanent fund exists today. There's 500 crores already in it, but it's not growing very much because mining is stopped again. But the principle exists, the precedent exists. This can happen anywhere in the country. And finally, the citizens' dividend is not yet in place. We are in advocacy in Goa as well as at the national level that this needs to be done. But it's a fairly obvious kind of a thing. Everybody, we know of cooperatives, we know of commons, we know of mutual funds, we know of companies, and if all of them are paying out dividends of some kind, there's no reason why this should not be done. So yes, we haven't got all the way there, but this is not utopia. This is clearly doable. So I'd like to just, we just come up with a little question on Slido, but who are we? Goa Foundation is an environmental nonprofit which was set up in 1986, as I explained. We've had two very important, globally significant judgments, one on the public trust doctrine dealing with the beach in Goa, and the second one was this Goa mining judgment on intergenerational equity. The Goa Foundation has spearheaded and created the future we need, which is we see as a global umbrella movement to implement intergenerational equity, and I'll explain why it's foundational for civilization. The Goenchi Mati movement is the starting point in Goa. We've seen the impact of the India mining campaign already. We started recently a campaign on deep sea mining in international waters, where it's considered the common heritage of mankind. So all of us have a share in that, and all of us have a responsibility in that. And finally, our fourth and most important campaign is something very arcane. I'll talk about it after the Q&A, the first set of Q&A. It's to correct international government accounting standards for mineral sales. And we've had some wins there also. So let me then move now to the Q&A. And Anas, if you can also put up the question, but we can look at the Q&A also.
Yeah, sure. I'll just share my screen for the questions that we have received. We have shared on the chat the link to ask questions, so we'll be taking questions as and when they come. I'll share my screen.
Okay.
Just a moment. Just quickly. Okay. Can you see my screen now? Yeah.
Okay. Should I just go down the questions because I don't see any of them having been upvoted? Let me do that. So which organization carried out this Goa study? It's been done in two phases. One, the initial phase was done by Goa Foundation. And then I've actually published a paper in the Economic and Political Weekly in 2015, Catastrophic Failure of Public Trust. If you can look that up. And so that's where the study is. It's in a peer-reviewed journal as well as it's already been studied. And it's pretty easy to replicate. Amit Singh Rana asks about state boundaries being artificially created. That is true. But what we are saying is we are going by how the Constitution defines mineral ownership. We're not asking for a change in how minerals should be owned. We're saying that this is what the Constitution says today. If this is what the Constitution says today, this has to be implemented. And the laws have to follow the Constitution, not the other way around. A question about what about those states which have fewer mineral resources than other states? What do I say? Bad luck. I mean, there is no way to equalize it in any way. But the good news is that offshore minerals, Bombay High, Krishna Godavari, where oil and gas is being found, those minerals belong to the national government, and So the national government should be creating a future generations fund from the money from that and paying out a all India citizens dividend. And as I explained, in deep sea mining, where the entire planet is a shared owner, there also the International Seabed Authority should be creating a global future generations fund and paying out the global commons dividend. Let me just how do we monitor? This is the last question I'll take, and I'll come back to the presentation. How do we monitor and identify beneficiaries in this case? Now, what we expect is that states are going to apply domicile rules, which is going to mean that like you have to be in a state for 15 years before you get eligible for the citizens' dividend. But we believe that it should be really like based on residency, because we're all citizens of India and not of a particular state, which is why one of the advantages of using the national pension scheme for everybody is that if I moved from Maharashtra to Goa, I would update my address with the national pension scheme and I would be deregistered from the Maharashtra scheme and moved on to the Goa scheme and vice versa. So this is one way we could possibly deal with this, but this has to be something that each state has to decide for themselves. These are principles, but implementation, we need to get into the implementation a little bit more. So let me just go back to my presentation, if I may, and okay. So what I want to do in this part of the presentation is talk a little bit about how does this deal with things like the resource curves. Because if you remember, we were trying to solve a governance problem with mining, and then I want to also, get into a little bit more about how do we look at the environment, and then sort of the longer implications of this. So, what is really the problem with mining? The core problem that we see is that the minerals are being sold for a song. As we saw, something worth 100 was being sold for 5. And this creates incentives for the miners to extract as quickly as possible and disappear. So then when the people on the ground, they may protest on human rights grounds or because the environment is being destroyed or the agriculture and livelihood, any of that, it becomes very convenient for the miners to use legal and illegal corruption, which includes lobbying, political contributions like the bonds right now, or even straight up bribes to get the government, the bureaucracy to turn a blind eye, as well as to turn the, change the terms of the transaction in favor of the miner. So the second part of it is that the politician, even if it was, say, a 50-50 split, the politician is very incentivized to do the same thing. Even if the government got the full money, 100%, the politician, like we can see in many countries around the world, where we have autocracies, the politicians control all the money and the people on the ground have basically no rights. So that is the core problem. And unless we solve that, what we are doing with this structure is first trying to connect each one of us to the minerals we own. I don't know if the question got asked, we had set it up as to whether you feel that you personally own minerals. Now, most people in talks I give, out of maybe 50 people, 3 people raise their hands and say, we believe or we feel intrinsically that we own the minerals. But as I've explained, you do own the minerals and you don't know it. And more than that, you have a duty to ensure that the minerals are protected for your children. And what is happening is, because you don't know it, you don't really see what's going on with it, it's being stolen and it's being used to create this entire this poor system. So the dividend is the most crucial part of the 5 principles. It is intended to connect you to your minerals and to your responsibilities to your future generations. Once you have the dividend, now everybody in the state of Goa, everybody is now becoming a watchdog with an interest and a duty. Now, if we add that to the requirement to ensure zero loss, which is also a fair deal for the extractors and owners, now there is a lot, the incentive structure is starting to change, and only good extractors will enter the business because it makes reasonable profits, but they will do it in a way that they meet all the terms and conditions, the environment is managed properly, human rights are managed properly, because if they don't, the consequences are severe. Similarly, the fund plus the dividend, as well as zero loss, protects the entire mineral wealth from being captured by the politicians and then consumed in ways which are not beneficial either to the present generation or to the future generations. If you know the resource curse literature, there are a couple of other issues this also deals with. A classic issue in the resource curse literature is the volatility in commodity prices. Let me give you a simple example again in Goa. When iron ore prices went down and iron ore mining was not very profitable, then what a lot of miners did was that they asked the truck owners to add a little sideboard to the truck so that the trucks could carry a little bit more material and the cost came down. The politicians were okay with it because if mining stopped, then there would be an employment issue, as well as not so much money coming into the government. So they let that happen. Now, when prices go back up, this illegality does not stop. And the other problem that occurs is that when the politician gets a lot of money in the budget from mining, when there's a boom, they spend it. And when the prices collapse, now there's a budget shortfall. And then the whole thing gets into a mess. You can see this today in a number of countries, Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, in Alaska. And COVID is actually, this is a contributing factor through COVID to many budgets all over the world. And in small countries where mineral exports are a large part of their foreign exchange, it also deals with one form of the Dutch disease, which is the exchange rate appreciation, which is when the future generations fund is invested abroad like Norway does. So this structure also mitigates the resource curse. But let me talk about why we don't actually see the shared inheritance paradigm. It seems very obvious when it's explained to anybody that we own the mineral, just save it and create a fund and distribute the income. But we've actually believed that this is coming from the way governments treat minerals in their accounts. So what do we get when we sell our minerals? We get royalty and auction premium. These are called revenue. But it's not revenue. You're selling your family gold. It's an asset, and what you're receiving is capital. But if you call it revenue, now when Goa got that 5 rupees, if mining got doubled, they would get 10 rupees. The politician will say, mining is very good because we can lower your taxes or we can spend on useful things. And the voters are also very happy because their taxes go down, some useful things are happening. But the result is every single bit of mineral will get extracted and consumed. And actually, this is a problem beyond mining. This is actually the core and the essence of our climate change and sustainability. Because if politicians all over the world can stand up and say that when we extract our fossil fuels, we get income or revenue or tax or earnings, the voters will support it, and every last bit of fossil fuels will be extracted, consumed, and civilization will go for a toss. So we are asking for the government accounting standards to change. Now, we of course wrote to the government of Goa, but we naturally understand that if an environmental NGO writes to them about government accounting standards, they're going to say, we know nothing. This comes from the national standards. And even when we wrote to the government of India, we also understand that this comes from the global standards, which are the IMF Government Finance Statistics Manual. So we've actually written to the IMF, and we met them a couple of years ago to discuss this issue. There's a second set of accounting standards which also apply, which are the International Public Sector Accounting Standards Board, and its entity in India is the GASAB, Government Accounting Standards Board. We've discussed and as part of the IPSASB work plan for 2019 to 2023, based on our advocacy, they put a new standard for natural resources as their top priority. So this part is also another thing that we've achieved. The third standard, which is related, because the IMF has told us very clearly that unless the national income accounting standards change, they cannot change. But I'm happy to report that the SNA is actually currently under review. There are 90 issues, and this issue is about 3 or 4 in those 90. But we are in discussion to see if they can be put on a top priority. And lastly, the main private sector accounting standard is IFRS 6, Exploration for Evaluation of Mineral Resources, and that may also be under review. So it is possible that in a few years, all these accounting standards will change, and then politicians will no longer be able to stand up and say, we've got minerals, we've made we are getting windfall revenue. Let's take that money, let's have a party, spend it, let's forget the future. It's a windfall, it's revenue. Now let me talk a little bit about the larger framework where we look at everything, including the environment, the local population, their issues, and all of that. Now, if you think about intergenerational equity, we have to ensure that our children inherit everything that we inherited. It's not just the mineral value. We talked about the mineral value already, but there are also the externalities where we're destroying certain inheritances like the environment, like the health of the local population. We're reducing the social capital of a society because corruption is increasing. A third part of it is the another classical argument for mining is the employment and jobs. And our argument is that this is also an inheritance, because once the minerals we have this employment because the minerals are still in the ground. Once the minerals are taken out and extracted, those jobs are gone. Think about Kola gold mines. We were extracting there for 100 years, or the British started it and we did it at industrial scale, and it was going on for long before. But now the mines are exhausted, the jobs are gone. If the mineral had been left, the jobs would be available today. The fourth asset that we've inherited is the opportunity to create other core competencies. Can we become experts in mining? Norway has done this very well. They've become, they've created global leaders in oil exploration, in rig building, things like that. It's a one-time opportunity to extract the minerals. So if we can create a global core competency, we can actually have other benefits from it going forward. And lastly, the opportunity to use the mineral for something useful. I know we can make, as they say classically, you can make plowshares, or you can make swords, arms, or agricultural equipment, or you can export it off to China, which is what we're doing in Goa. So in the mineral policy, let me just talk a little bit about this. There are two caps which are being contemplated. One is a cap on local deposits, so that the opportunity to earn income is also available for future generations, as well as possibly a cap at the national level or strategic reserves for certain minerals which we may feel are important, and currently we can import them. It may be preferable to import them rather than to use our mineral deposits, we can save them for future. So then how do we look at the environment, the second of those two items? The first thing is we apply the precautionary principle to this. We have to identify no-go areas. Ideally, these will be high eco-sensitive areas. We would have restrictions on things that we really don't understand what the risks are. For example, in the Netherlands, they extracted gas for many years, and now the land in the Netherlands is actually subsided, which is a big problem because it's below sea level, and there's a huge number of earthquakes that have begun. A similar example with deep sea mining is we really don't know what's down there, and if we start mining today, I mean, we're just in the dark and we're going to cause a whole lot of damage we shouldn't. The third aspect is we need to have a cumulative area impact. In Goa, we had the peak over 100 mines running. So the overall impact of all these mines together has to be capped. And this is the third cap which is contemplated in the National Mineral Policy. But this is really around local area impacts and making sure that all of those are within control. And of course, we have environmental standards, which are again based on the precautionary principle. If we stay within this, we won't have a disaster. And then when there are still externalities, the forest on top of the mineral does get cut. The first thing you do is you try to avoid doing that. Can you avoid open cast mining and just do underground mining? Then you have mine closure plans for restoration of mines. Then you have things like Campa, where maybe you can't restore immediately because the mine is operating. You have to plant trees elsewhere. And finally, you pay money, which is actually how Campa is working. Earlier, it used to be you have to plant the trees. Now you just give money. So this is the hierarchy that we see for the environment, and we have a much more detailed structure we've suggested specifically for Goa, but this is the principle. The same thing applies with communities, except that you also need free, prior, and informed consent of the local communities. This was implemented in Niyamgiri, the famous Supreme Court judgment, where the Gram Sabhas were asked for their approval and they denied it. And then you have the precautionary principle. Again, you identify no-go areas, maybe primitive tribes, we should not be extracting in those areas, restrictions, impact caps, and then we have offsets where we give equivalent land or create jobs. And then finally, we have compensation structures like benefit sharing and the District Mineral Foundation. Let me move on to the SDGs. There are 169 17 categories of SDGs and 169 specific goals, but there are 5 broad principles in the preamble: people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnership. And you can see that the 5 principles certainly would reduce poverty and hunger, improve equality, by lowering incentives to extract, by protecting the environment and climate better. We are making progress on the planet part of it. The universal basic income will definitely increase prosperity, as well as we discussed all the other things involved. If you save more money, you're getting the market rate of return, all of that. Peace. If everybody is benefiting equally, then is this a solution for places like Chhattisgarh or Jharkhand where we have a Mao issue, or in places around the world like in Nigeria where competing tribes are fighting? And then finally, partnership, because partnership really is a euphemism for finding the money for implementing the SDGs. And here it's an entirely self-financing scheme. So basically, this takes a huge step towards implementing the SDGs. And if you think about it, as I was explaining right at the very beginning, if we don't implement the intergenerational equity or don't make it the #1 principle ahead of even growth, what will happen is the present generation, each generation will consume some of our inheritance that's been happening over the previous generations. And if we don't stop it now and keep consuming our inheritance, soon enough, the next generation or the one after that is going to inherit nothing, and civilization is going to collapse. So the intergenerational equity in our mind is crucial, not just for minerals, not just for natural resources, but for civilization, society, and for the economy and so forth. So please join us in trying to implement this future we need. Thank you. I'll take up some questions now. The rest of the Q&A.
Hello. Yeah. I'll just share my screen for the questions.
Sure.
Okay, just a minute. So we also took that quiz. If you would like to see the question for the quiz on do you personally own minerals?
Yeah, let's say do you personally own minerals? 14% said yes, only 14%. Okay, but that's still better than normal. It's normally in the 6% kind of a range. Okay, shall we?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me take the question. What is the role of municipal bodies and village panchayats in this funds and its disbursement or through this institutional structure? Municipal bodies currently have no role, but in 6 scheduled areas, those are some of the districts in the northeast states, under the constitution, they get 26% of the royalty. So that should also go into a district future generations fund, and a district level citizen dividend should be paid out. And similarly, under the Samta judgment for the 5th schedule areas, Pesa Gram Sabhas have a role. They can create local future generation funds and pay out citizen dividend. And in my mind, the District Mineral Foundation should also consider, there is a provision for an endowment fund, but they should consider a considerable amount also in this kind of a format where they pay out citizens' dividends to the mining affected people, effectively a universal basic income for that group. What about states like Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, where private players, private and public players form a nexus? Do we have the political will in these states for a new paradigm? And my sense is the politicians eventually do what the voters want. So we are very clear as Goenchi Mati, and the future we need is that we are a non-partisan political movement, because we have to change politics. If we don't change the politics, if we do not make this demand on behalf of ourselves and especially on behalf of our children, this looting will continue. And we will have these problems, and we will really have to wonder at some point, how did we let this happen? And remember, our children are going to be our eventual judges, our children and future generations. And they are going to ask you, you knew about the 5 principles, what did you do? So this is a personal responsibility to everybody. We have to make sure this gets done. The next question, are courts proactively taking part in environment law matters such as this? The efficiency of NGT and Honorable Supreme Court. Now, as I explained, in the Goa judgment, the permanent fund as well as the cap on extraction, both on environmental grounds as well as the employment, has been ruled, implemented by the Supreme Court on grounds of intergenerational equity. In the Odisha illegal mining judgment, the common cause judgment, the Supreme Court ordered the review of the national mineral policy specifically after discussing intergenerational equity. So the Supreme Court is very interested in this. As I showed you, the government of India has implemented this in the national mineral policy, but even earlier in the famous 2017 economic survey by Arvind Subramaniam, where he talked about universal basic income, in another section which discussed the resource curse, he actually discussed this idea of ours. And the Ministry of Environment, Finance, Environment, Forest and Climate Change, again in our Goa litigation, there was an expert committee, and the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change supported the expert committee The expert committee recommended the permanent fund and dividend and cap, which is what the Supreme Court implemented. So both the Supreme Court as well as the government of India is in support of this, but we have to push this further through the legal system to make sure this gets done properly. The next question. For creating a fund will require nationalization of mineral resources which are uncompetitive in comparison to private sector. What are your views on it? What we are saying is that under the constitution, and this is true, mineral resources already belong to the state. There's no nationalization involved. What happens is that the mining companies are given a mining lease. So when do the mining companies own the mineral? 3 conditions have to be met. One is that they have to have a valid mining lease and have to met all the conditions of that mining lease. Second is they have to win the ore. This is an sort of a legal term of art, but it basically means you have actually to dig stuff out. You can't just pick stuff up and take it. You actually have to mine. And the third is you have to pay the consideration for the mineral, which is the royalty and the auction premium. Only at that point does the person with the mining lease own the mineral. So this does not require nationalization. This is already the status. The states own the minerals. Now, whether private sector is more efficient than the public sector or not is something to judge. The real question is, can the public sector be worse than losing 95% that we saw in the private sector? And in a Supreme Court judgment, one of the order rulings were that the last 5 years of mining in Goa was fully illegal, 100% illegal. Again, can public sector be worse than 100% illegal mining? Probably not, but this is a call that everybody has to make. The goal is to achieve zero loss. We have to make sure that whatever structure we employ achieves zero loss. Please focus on community rights on natural resources in terms of stake and share in the context of Future Generations Fund. As I explained, under the Constitution, there are 2 or 3 things. You have 6 scheduled areas where the Hill District Councils get 26% of royalty. 5th scheduled areas under the Samta judgment, if applied to the whole 5th scheduled areas, have a similar sharing kind of a mechanism, but it's not exactly fixed. We have the district mineral foundations, and we also have, under the polluters pay, any kind of damage to the local population has to be compensated. We also believe that in the process of extraction, the local population should have a right to even form cooperatives and do the work of extraction, though they should only earn a normal profit and not become a mining baron in sort of turn. Instead of whoever is making all the money and creating all this problem, they should not do that. They should still earn the reasonable profit, but whereas the owners, which is the entire people of the state and future generations, they should get the money into their Future Generations Fund. In a situation where ownership of resources rests with private players, how do we ensure this kind of distributional outcomes? As I explained, it doesn't exist there. And even where leases have been granted in the past without an auction, it is obvious now after seeing the auction results that states have a moral and probably a legal duty to find every legal manner to terminate those leases and re-auction them. So you can see this in Karnataka, where the state government has said we do not want to renew the lease of NMDC for the Donai Malai lease, because they are saying that if we auction that lease, we will get an 80% auction premium. And this is actually the correct way they should be doing this. But if the mining company is mining perfectly legally, then there is no way the state should or could terminate that lease. The next question, will this increase transparency in government action and handling of mineral resources? We believe that if we have to actually implement intergenerational equity, we need something which we're calling radical transparency. So let me explain this. The core problem we're trying to do is to protect great wealth from theft. Now we know that the biggest risk to any great wealth is always some insider collaborating with somebody outside. And let me give you a trivial example. If you think of Star Wars and the Death Star, it could like wipe out a solar system at a flash. It was clearly the most valuable thing of the evil empire. But one person gave the plans to the rebel army, and there was one tiny fatal flaw in it, and the Death Star got destroyed. How do you prevent this? If you rely on insiders, you cannot prevent this. So we are saying that we need radical transparency. Every single person has a responsibility to their future generations, and every single person has to have all the information available so that they can make sure that their duty is being fulfilled to future generations. So this means going well beyond the RTI Act, going well beyond the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, which India has not signed up to, goes well beyond open government, the Open Government Partnership Standards, which again the Indian government is not signed up to. We need radical transparency. What are the bureaucratic needs of ensuring such trickle down? Well, there is going to be a lot of needs upfront in ensuring zero loss. There's no question of minimizing that. But once the money comes into the government, it all gets sent to the National Pension Scheme, assuming that gets adopted. And then the bureaucracy is more or less out of it. There will be rules and regulations to make sure that the enrollment of people is done properly. People are not cheating. In Goa, we have the situation where a number of Goans can take up Portuguese citizenship. So when they take up Portuguese citizenship, they should be deregistered from the citizens' dividend. So there are certain bureaucratic needs, but it actually comes down because you don't need to simultaneously monitor mining as well as simultaneously now start monitoring what's going on with all this money and the various kinds of ways this money can be wasted. How can state be accountable to collect fund? I really can't. I mean, it really comes down to all of us to insist the state be accountable. Accountability does not. It comes when people demand accountability. If you do not demand accountability from your elected people or from the bureaucrats, they will not be accountable, as they haven't been, as we can see in Goa. By the way, the Goa data we've replicated in other states for other minerals, and even the recent auctions that have been going on for various minerals, the auction premium compared to what they get without the auction, you can see that the pre-auction loss rates are well above 80%. So we have not been insisting on accountability. We have to all get down to this. We have to take ownership of this problem. Next question, how will the UBI amount, the citizens' dividend amount, which comes as an outcome of this, be determined based on mineral resources available with each state? Now, what we are saying is that we get the dividend only based on the money in the Future Generations Fund. We do not look at what minerals are left in the ground. If we extract that and we put the money in the Future Generations Fund, only then we look at the income that we get on the fund. And remember, we have to make good first any losses that have been made, plus any losses, from inflation, reduction in the purchasing power. All of that has to be set aside, and only the residual can be spent, which we assume is about maybe 2 to 3%. But this is a classic problem in endowment fund management, and this can be figured out pretty easily. We can work out, what is the inflation rate, CPI, and we can do some estimates of what is maybe any other kinds of losses and work this out. But we do know, it is a question that we haven't worked out the answer in full, and surely somebody can research this along with us. The next question, will this not have the same implementation issues and high transaction costs like most other social protection schemes? We actually don't see this as social protection. We see this as a right. We own the mineral, we own the fund, we own this as a citizen's dividend. It doesn't matter what it costs. If we own it, we get it. It's as simple as that. Now we all have to get together and figure out how to reduce the cost. Maybe if the money is small, we pay it out once a year instead of once a month, so that it accumulates to a larger amount. Maybe we have things like this money goes automatically into the national pension scheme until it becomes large enough. Maybe we have a scheme where for young people, it accumulates that they can take it out in a lump sum when they reach adulthood, so they have a stake for entrepreneurship. So there are various kinds of ways we can think about it to reduce transaction costs. But this is not social protection. This is a right. And we absolutely must have it. The next question, what about DMF? I'm not sure what about DMF, but let me just take the next question. What is the clarification between DMF and Goa Future Generations Fund? So when we look at the cost of extraction, the money that goes into the District Mineral Foundation really comes into the category of compensating for the problems created by mining. Because the District Mineral Foundation is for the benefit of the mining affected people and areas. So that forms part of the cost of extraction, and only the residual is the value of the mineral that goes to the entire state. So the DMF, CAMPA, all of that is considered part of the cost of extraction and is taken out of the value first. Next question from Sandeep Chatterjee. Slaughter mining subsidence are major stumbling blocks to preservation of human resources. How do these factors pose threats to mineral wealth management? I'm not sure entirely what slaughter mining is. I'm not familiar with this term. Subsidence is sort of, we discussed this in the Netherlands case. We can see this in Jharia, for instance, where we have the coal fires and then the land subsides. Our methodology for this is we have to first employ the precautionary principle. We have to, if there is a risk of things like this happening, we must either cap the mining or ensure that we employ methodologies that avoid this problem. Or we say that we just sort of, this is a zone we give up for the moment, let it all subside, and then at some point we'll take the overburden that has been taken out and start refilling it. Or maybe in some cases there's a proposal in Goa to not to refill this and use this as a water reservoir. We have to think creatively about it, but we must first employ the precautionary principle and use that to minimize the risk. And if then this thing happens, then we have to then sit down and try and figure out what we can do. There's no clear, easy answer to this. So we've gone through all the questions. I'm not sure what I should do right now. Should we open it up to any more questions through Slido, or should we just put in the next polls? I think the next polls would be good. Anas?
Yeah, Rahul, I see one last question in the chat. If it's all right, I'll read it out. What is the role of the Gram Sabha in the scheduled areas with respect to allocation of mining leases to purely government companies? Is the consent of Gram Sabha mandatory?
I honestly don't know. This is outside my expertise because Goa actually doesn't have any fifth schedule areas where the Pesa Gram Sabha comes into being. But my I know that the Samta judgment did not quite deal with government mining and private mining the same way. So I would really defer this question to somebody who understands this better. I don't think I should try and answer this. So shall we then go to the next? Okay. This is a poll. If you guys would like to should we as a society prioritize intergenerational equity or growth? Because there's a fundamental conflict between these two. And they're connected. What we're saying is that we take our inheritance of natural resources, cultural things that we've discovered over time, and based on that capital, we can generate income. So the primary goal is to maintain capital, and then what is left after that is the income. So what we are trying to grow is the income, but what is happening because of the way the accounting is being done is we're not maintaining the capital in the first place. Now, this definition of capital first and income as the residual is both the standard definition in accounting, as well as the economists would know that Hicks's famous definition of income was basically the residual after capital is held constant. And as I explained, we don't maintain the capital, then we're sort of going to decline. We're not maintaining sustainability, and we're going to end up at in a situation where we don't have any capital left. So I personally feel if we don't have intergenerational equity first, then we can keep growing and we will eventually become completely unsustainable. But I can see this audience is now neck to neck, 50-50. Growth is as important as intergenerational equity. Fair enough.
Okay, so should I stop sharing my screen?
Yeah, you want to just put the other questions up? I can just. I'm just wondering whether there's anything else I should do. Let me just. Can you put up the last few questions?
Yeah, Rajshi, it's part of the feedback form, so I'll just quickly get it.
Sorry, Anas, I couldn't catch that.
Yeah, so the last questions apart from the feedback form, can we share that?
Sure, the feedback form is shared. I can share the last two questions on the chat here.
Yeah.
I'd like to share one more. While we're doing this, since we've got a bit of time, let me share a couple of slides I didn't show earlier. So this is how we see this as being fair mining. The miners earn a reasonable profit, the mining workers are taken care of. The state basically has to fulfill its duty as a public trustee. The people earn the income from the extraction, they get a citizen's dividend. The children and future generations, their inheritance is safeguarded, and the damage to the environment is protected, is reduced. So it's extremely fair to everybody, and regardless of which sort of economic system you come from, whether you're at the libertarian end or the communist end, if you believe in private property, all we're asking is follow the principles of private property. And if you come from an economic system where you believe that we cannot own natural resources, then the answer to intergenerational equity is leave the minerals in the ground because you don't have a right to it. In terms of the these are the benefits. In terms of universal basic income, and I can, because I'm also a member of Indian Network for Basic Income, let me talk a little bit about the kinds of things that we've seen already from universal basic income. There are 4 categories. One is welfare or capability effects, which is improvement in nutrition, health, school attendance, sanitation improves, economic activity, and very importantly, socioeconomic status of the disadvantaged classes of people, women, children, disabled, elderly, all of them, because they are getting a personal income, not a family income. There are equity effects also, because obviously anybody disadvantaged in many other ways are being treated equally. if you think about it, this citizens' dividend, if it gets implemented, will be the first time after the vote that everybody is tangibly treated equally. We talk about equality, but it's only the vote which is really equal. Nothing else is equal. This would be tangibly equal. We discussed the growth effects, but which also comes at the village level. In Madhya Pradesh, Seva conducted a very famous pilot. And what happens is that these local economies are largely subsistence, and whatever cash they get, they use for things like mobile top-ups and various other kinds of things, medicines that they have to get from outside the village economy. What happened with this, with the universal basic income that was paid out there was people started small micro enterprises. A group of youth got together, dug a pond, put fish into it. Another woman bought a goat. And by the end of the experiment, now there were people to buy these goats and fish because everybody was getting income and the whole village economy itself had started growing. And that will also reduce pressure on our cities, for example. It has a whole variety of other things, other benefits. And last is really freedom, because it allows you to pay down debt. It provides you a little bit of insurance. And it also enables, it gives you a little bit of buffer in certain cases for people if they want to go out and protest when the government isn't implementing something sensible. Then even if they lose the day's income, they get a little bit of money from the dividend. So that is another way that this can benefit sort of the people specifically. The universal basic income or the citizens' dividend can benefit a lot of people. So let me stop here. I see there are one or two questions also. Biodiversity is protected. What about biodiversity, sir? This is what I was saying right at the beginning, right when I was talking about the environment. We have to identify our no-go areas. We have to be very clear about what it is we want to protect right up front. And then within those areas, the areas we do decide to mine, even there we have to put in cumulative caps, because we cannot just destroy everything. We do not have a right. We have an obligation to our future generations to ensure they inherit the biodiversity as well.
Yeah. So we have another question on the chat. If I'll read it out for you. When we say intergenerational equity is important, the population is ever growing. From around 7.8 billion people right now, in the future we would reach 10 billion. So how does it remain somewhat equal?
The way it works is that we as a group of people own the mineral. Now, if we tend to have more and more, it's like a commons. If you've got a pasture and 10 people have access to it, and then they have lots of children, and now 20 people have access to it, the commons hasn't grown. It's just that each person gets a smaller and smaller share. So it's in a way an incentive to not maybe have so many people, or maybe it's an incentive for some people to have many children. In Alaska, where actually they've been paying out the citizens' dividend since I think 1996, they found initially a small spike in the birth rate, but it rapidly came down back to normal, and like everywhere else, it's now well below, like most other places in the developed world, it's well below the fertility rate. So most likely this is what will happen. There'll be an initial small spike, but because now they have this dividend, the likelihood of children surviving better, the education will be better. We will find over a period of time a longer reduction in the population growth rates. But yes, I mean, we can only share it amongst the people who are alive today, and we can't sort of ensure because we can't see into the future.
Thank you so much, Rahul. We have shared the feedback form, and we have also shared the questions in which you requested us to share. I think that the conversation has been very engaging. So we'll allow people to have some time to process and then share their suggestions, and we'll email the feedback forms to you and the details where the suggestions received from and the feedback received. On behalf of Center for Civil Society, I'd like to thank you for joining this conversation. It has been very interesting, and we appreciate the work Goa Foundation has been doing, particularly in the mining sector. Thank you so much, and I think the audience has enjoyed a lot. You can see it on the chat. Amazing feedback. So, any final comments you'd like to?
I'd like to first thank the audience as well as the entire team at CCS. You've been fantastic. And I just want to leave you with a pitch. We have something which can be vastly superior to what's going on. What's going on is awful, and we don't realize how bad it is. This can only change if everybody gets involved. It cannot change by Goa Foundation or a small group of people. We need everybody to get involved. And if you don't get involved, it's really going to get worse and worse and worse. So please join us in trying to create the future we need.